Thank you, Patrick. Thank you. It is great to be here. I am a relative newcomer. This is only my ninth appearance at Mac Sysadmin. So, yeah, I'll make up for it. Like, I'll be here in another 10, 15 years. We'll keep this going. Um, my name, in case you missed it, is Armin Briegel. You might know my website, Scripting OS 10 and Mac Admin News. I also work as a consulting engineer for Jamf in the European region, which is a fun job. I get to do great fun things there. Last year I stood on stage and I had a little bit of fun. Because I was talking about the programming language Swift, I gave it all a Taylor Swift theme, and I thought that was fun, at least from up here. So I thought, well, what can I do this year? And I wanted to talk about the enrollment process and the enrollment workflow. And I had a bit of trouble combining that with some pop culture until I realized, well, this is actually a kind of first contact. It's the first contact between you and the end user, your new coworker. So, perfect idea. But for those who don't know, this is Star Trek First Contact, the 8th movie in the Star Trek franchise, and of course the best movie in the Star Trek franchise. he says provocatively. And I did some deep research, so I rewatched it, of course, and I found this scene.
Borg. Sounds Swedish.
All right. All right.
Definitely Swedish.
So with no offense to this great hosting country and the people and everybody here, I had to do this, right? Star Trek is, of course, the franchise that started in 1966 and has since then spanned, depending on how you count, 7 to 9 live-action series and 3 animated series, as well as 14 movies of varying quality. And if you look at it, there's like more than 950 episodes to watch right now over the last 60 years. Usually at this point, I do a thing where like, oh, when this happened, Macs looked like this or iPhones looked like this. But in 1966, that's still 10 years from when Apple was going to be founded and nearly 20 years until the Mac was released. So I have to do it the other way around. And I'm going to do a quick overview of things that Star Trek predicted that we actually now have. And this was one of the first things that really surprised me, and that's automatic sliding doors. Apparently they were around in the 60s, but slow, unreliable, and people considered them dangerous. And in the movie, that was science fiction. Mobile communication devices that fit in your pocket, that's an obvious one, right? Including the flip phone form factor, which is having a revival now, that smartphones can do that. So maybe we get an iPhone, who knows? Biometric authentication. The scene is a handprint scanner. In Star Trek, I've also seen retinal scanners, face scanners, and voice identification used for biometric authentication. I love this picture. It's a wireless headset in 1966. But yeah, now we run around with AirPods and Bluetooth headsets, and nobody thinks about that. If you're talking on the street, you're not crazy anymore. You're just having a conference, right? Tricorders, they're the portable sensor things that can measure everything within Star Trek. But our devices, both our phones and our watches and everything else, they're just getting laden with sensors. It's not just GPS, but everything else. Medical scanners, this is much smaller than the NMR and CT scans that the hospitals are, but they basically serve the same purpose, and we have them, they're reality now. This is a more recent prediction from Star Trek, the emergency medical hologram, a virtual artificial intelligence that actually can serve as a doctor. People are using LLMs for medical purposes. I'm not quite sure I'm happy about that, but it seemed crazy 20 years ago when Voyager came out. It seemed crazy that Voyager is 20 years old, but yeah, we're kind of getting there. Flat screens were everywhere in the 80s and Next Generation, and now they're really everywhere. Same with touch screens, tablets, now we carry them around with us. Video conferencing. The most science fiction thing about Star Trek is, of course, that they can agree on the protocols with completely strange alien species pretty much immediately. But okay. There's the holodeck for virtual reality, but there's very few augmented reality heads-up displays in Star Trek. I think because it just doesn't work very well in TV. There's this one scene in Deep Space Nine where they have that. Another thing that they did for TV was to invent the universal translator, so we didn't have to mess with not understanding the aliens all the time. The universal translator did that, and it was, of course, crazy science fiction that would never happen. And now we get live translation on our phones and on our AirPods, as long as we're not in the EU, but that's a different story. Star Trek also predicted that we would interact through voice interfaces.
That information is not available. Please restate request.
The android at the bar said you could show me my old ship. Let me see it.
Insufficient data. Please specify parameters.
The Enterprise. Show me the bridge of the Enterprise, you chattering piece of...
There have been 5 Federation ships with that name. Please specify by registry number.
NCC 1701. No bloody A, B, C, or D.
Program complete. Enter when ready.
They not only predicted that we'd be interacting through the voice, they actually predicted the impatience and frustration that would come along with it. I just love that. The technical things in Star Trek are fun, but they're basically just the backdrop. I think what Star Trek got most famous for, and what I personally love Star Trek most, is that it gave us a vision of the humanity in the future that had overcome nationalism and poverty and war. In 1966, the Cold War was heating up, forgive the pun, but they put a Russian character, an Asian character, and an African woman character on the bridge. And Star Trek has kind of kept that up. There's been highs and lows, but Star Trek has always given us a very human vision of the future. And the best episodes are about humanity and not the technology. And that's kind of how I get the curve back to the actual topic, because this is Mac sysadmin. Steve Jobs loved to show this slide and said that Apple is at the intersection of technology and the liberal arts. And because of that, they put the human at the center and the humanity of everything at the center. It's not about the technology when they do things really, really good. And there's been ups and downs under Steve Jobs and since then. But when Apple does things right, it's about putting the human at the center and thinking about that and solving those needs and all of that. So with that preamble, I give you my Mac sysadmin talk, managing first contact. The bridge sounds will go away eventually. I don't like links and slides. I hate QR codes. There is a page on my website, scriptingos10.com/MSA Mac sysadmin, MSA 2025. All the links will be there. The slides are there. And once the video is online, I will link it there as well. So why should we care? Why should we care about managing enrollment? Why should we care about this first contact with your end user? And the thing is that first impressions are very, very important. And they're not just important when you're meeting an alien species for the first time that happened to fly through your solar system as you were testing the prototype of your faster-than-light drive. They're also important when you get a new coworker, or the new coworker gets a new device. It is our chance as the IT department, we own those devices, right? To show, not just tell, but show that they are managed and secured, that these are organizational devices. We can do that, among other things, with branding. And yes, the word branding comes from branding iron, which is how cattle were marked in a very painful way. We don't have to mark our devices with fire, but we can leave the corporate branding and the organizational branding on them to say, hey, look, this is a managed device. This isn't really yours. Remember that. The IT department is also often the department that has to say no. We have to forbid things, we have to restrict things. We have to say, you can't do that, I'm so sorry. And there's a good reason for that. But we can also give this a positive spin. We can be the company that makes things easy and friendly and maybe even a bit fun in some cases, while remaining professional, competent, and most of all, helpful. We need to uncomplicate things. Even when we have to restrict things, we have to keep the human at the center, the humanity, and how can we simplify this? How can we do this from the perspective of the new user and make this easy while remaining professional and competent? So which tools do we have? Which tools does Apple give us? And we used to have imaging and net install and netboot and all of these things. They went away when MDM was more important, and now we're moving into the era of DDM, or device management. It looks a bit different. When MDM first came around, we got user-initiated enrollment and device enrollment program. DEP was mentioned earlier. Those have been renamed since then. Device enrollment program is now automated device enrollment, ADE. And if you look at Apple's documentation, it's not user-initiated enrollment anymore, but profile-based device enrollment, which is a mouthful. I will say user-initiated enrollment several times going forward. And there's relative newcomers based on managed Apple accounts that have been talked about last year and the year before, account-driven device enrollment and account-driven user enrollment. And if you look at those names, you start to notice, oh, there's a thing here, there's a pattern. This isn't just weird names that Apple marketing thought up. They kind of make sense. We have device enrollment, 3 of them, and the user enrollment one. We have 2 of them that work with managed Apple accounts, so they're account-driven. Then we have profile-based and automated. So there's a idea behind this madness. Not all platforms support all ways of enrolling, so that's something to keep in mind when you're choosing these workflows. Check if your platform actually supports them, and if your device management service actually supports them. The outcome with these is not always the same. Automated device enrollment give you the most management. User enrollment will give you the least. There's a point to that. Again, there's some things that are commonalities across multiple of these. Sometimes they're very similar, but subtly different, which is quite annoying. There are downsides to each and every one of them. Automated device enrollment depends on Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager, which isn't available in every region. User-initiated enrollment has a very painful manual enrollment process that we need to manage somehow. And the 2 center ones result in a removable enrollment profile, which is a downside. So does user enrollment, but in user enrollment, that's kind of the point. So let's talk about account-driven user enrollment. I said you have a removable enrollment profile, but that's kind of the point. The point of account-driven user enrollment is this is the bring your own device. And it's not necessarily a user-owned device. It can certainly be, but you might be in a smaller organization or even a larger organization that wants the user to feel in control of their phone, because phones are very personal devices, but we still want to provide some management to them. And then going to account-driven user enrollment might give you the split of privacy and management that you need. The managed software you install and the data of that is on a separate partition that is separately encrypted. And if you remove the enrollment, or if the user removes the enrollment, all of the managed data gets removed, but the user still retains the privacy. Technically, macOS supports account-driven user enrollment, but there's some challenges here. We as admins have certain expectations to what we can do with a management system on the Mac, like install third-party devices that are not in the Mac App Store, that are not possible with account-driven user enrollment, or would go counter to the privacy expectations of the user with account-driven user enrollment. And very, very few device management services support ADUE on macOS. The next two, and I'm grouping them together because they are very similar, except for the actual enrollment workflow, the results are very similar, are the manual device enrollment, profile-based, and account-driven device enrollment. There's differences in which platforms are supported for each, so check that out. It would be great if we could ignore these and not use these going forward, but we need them as a backup, because you will encounter in every organization situations where automated device enrollment is not available. Either you have legacy devices, devices that were purchased externally, not through the right channels, they won't end up in Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager, and you have to manage that. Or they're from regions that don't have Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager. We use the profile-based device enrollment a lot for pre-Tahoe migrations, and Eric and Grace will talk later this week about the Tahoe migration workflow, and I'd be happy if we can get rid of those workflows. They result in a removable MDM profile, which is a bit of a downside. And then finally, we have automated device enrollment. That works across most Apple platforms, or actually all of them. It is automated. It gives us the out-of-box management, the zero-touch enrollment that Apple and us device management service providers love to show off. And it also gives you the most control. The machine is managed. The MDM profile is not removable. We can lock down things that even an admin user cannot change. And with DDM, we get more and more of these things, which is really great. Its main downside is the regional availability. If you have a really international organization, that can be a challenge. Because I only have about 30-something minutes left, I'm going to focus on automated device management. And I am going to focus on the Mac platform. You can do many of these things on the other platforms, but the management and the deployment workflows on the other platforms is easier because Apple lets us do less. On macOS, we have more control. We need more control because there's more things we can do. And the entire enrollment process gets a bit more complex because of that. So that's what I'm going to focus on. But most of the ideas and most of the general theme, you can also transfer to iOS and iPadOS and even visionOS enrollment. So what happens when we do an enrollment? You've all seen this multiple times, but I still want to go through it step by step. And Joel did a great interview with the things online earlier with the graphs and the arrows. I'm going to show what's happening on screen. I mean, first I get the welcome, and then the user clicks on that, and then we choose the language, and we have to do these things, right? And the first two screens are actually very special because I can't do screenshots and other things right now, and even getting a recording of these is a bit of a challenge. And after the language choice, it always takes longer than we want. We get to the region choice, and you can see that there's a flicker in the screen and the menu bar appears for a moment because something changes in here. And from now on, we have a localized experience. So the first question I often get when I show these things is, well, how do you record this? How do you take screenshots at this point? It's actually very easy. The same way I do screenshots anytime on macOS, I can use Shift-Command-3 to take a full screen screenshot. Once I reach this screen, it doesn't work on the earlier two screens. But I take the screenshot, I hear the shutter sound, where does the file go? Well, the really nice thing is, once I've done with the entire process and the user logs in for the first time, all of those screenshots appear on the desktop, and they have the LW for login window prefix, and I can just use them. This is the best, highest quality way to get screenshots here. But usually you probably like a movie because there's a lot of interaction going on and things, and you want to demonstrate that. Well, we can record at enrollment also. And one of the best things is that you can enable screen sharing at enrollment. We determined this like 2 years ago in a chat with Dan Snelson. Bart was in there too, and a few other people. We figured this out and put the pieces together. So I'm just giving back what we figured out back then. You need the client device that you're going to enroll, that you want to record, and you need to have a second Mac that will do the recording. We need to do some steps manually on the client device. So once we're at the language screen, at the region screen, you can do Control Option Command T, which opens Terminal, which we don't actually need, but we can use Terminal to get to the settings in the menu, and then we go to Sharing and enable screen sharing here. And then we go one step further, and in the screen sharing pane, we say, I want to request for access, because we don't have a user account or a password yet that we can use to enable screen sharing. Then we can remove those, and we move on to the next screen. There we go. We move on to the host Mac, we open screen sharing, and we say, I want to make a new connection. You can enter the rendezvous name, bonjour name, which at this point is the model name of the machine. You can also do IP address. You can look that up. We say, I want to ask permission to connect. And when I do that, on the client, the dialog pops up over Setup Assistant and says, do you want to allow connection? Then I choose the quality, and I'm in. I'm not just seeing the screen, I'm remote controlling the machine. And at this point, I can go full screen and start recording what's going on. I don't need any extra hardware. You probably want a segregated network for this to work reliably, but it works really well. This is still a bit of manual setup that I have to do. It's easier sometimes to use a capture card. I have an Elgato 1080p, which works great. There's better ones now. There's also smaller capture cards. Joel had a really small one earlier. I want to look at that. You want a 1080p one, otherwise the quality isn't good enough for recording because you won't be able to read all the text. And the Elgato comes with its extra software for capturing, which is total overkill for what I usually need. I just use QuickTime Player. So I open QuickTime Player and say New Movie Recording. You choose the Elgato as the input camera, and you will get this. Because it appears as an extended screen, as a second screen, to the client that does the enrollment. And during enrollment, extra screens just get the blurred background, and they don't show anything. The action is on the main screen, which is really frustrating because we want to record the extra stuff. The nice thing is you can hit Command F1 on a MacBook, and then it will actually enable mirroring immediately, and it will probably use the configuration of the external screen. So that's the native one of the capture card, and we're fine. Except, you can look at that. You saw it in Joel's presentation earlier. There's this yellow tinge to the recording, which, once you notice it, is really, really annoying. This comes from True Tone, and we can use the same trick we did earlier. So we use Control Option Command T to open terminal. We're not interested in terminal, though it can be very useful for debugging in other situations. But we use it to open settings. We go into displays and disable True Tone. And the moment you see that, the yellow tinge goes away, and your screenshots and your recordings look nice again. I also recommend for all presenters here, turn off True Tone before you're presenting, because otherwise the recording will get the same yellow tinge. So capture card for recording, it's the best way of doing things. You can also use virtualization. There's one downside to that. The trick to get automated device enrollment working on a virtualized machine only works on Intel devices, because VMs on Intel allow us to switch out the serial number and act like a device that gets enrolled. And Apple said earlier this year that Tahoe is the last version of macOS that will support Intel. And if you, like me, don't have a very, very, very recent Intel device, Sequoia is the end of the line, because there's a lot of Intel devices that don't support Tahoe. The good news is that all the manual enrollment methods work great on Apple Silicon VMs. Forgot that here. Apple Silicon virtual machines. So we can test pretty much everything except automated device enrollment on Apple Silicon virtual machines. So yeah, file feature requests, please. After this aside, let's continue in our enrollment process. We get past this, and we get to the next screen, and this will probably happen. There's always a straggler, too. We've all heard this 1,000 times. I've probably seen a T-shirt about that today. If you're not fast enough, the voiceover message will start. There's a reason it comes here, because if you have accessibility needs, you will need to set those up now to continue in the enrollment process or to even start the enrollment process. So even though it's annoying that we have to click over them over and over again, for most people, remember, they only do this once every 3 or 4 years or so. Once we get past that, we might have to connect to the network. We can connect to the Wi-Fi. If the device is not plugged into Ethernet, you enter the password. Interesting thing here is that this Wi-Fi connection and its password will be remembered throughout the enrollment process and stored in the final user's password keychain password app, unless you put a reboot somewhere in the process. For whatever reason, you think there might need to be a reboot, and then everything will be forgotten, and the device will boot back up and might not be able to connect to the Wi-Fi because the password was forgotten, which is really annoying. Or the enrollment was done by a tech who closed the device and gave it to a user who moves to a different Wi-Fi, maybe at home, and they won't get a chance to reconnect to the Wi-Fi. I usually recommend using Ethernet for the initial enrollment. It's a more reliable network, it's faster. But if you have a split setup, again, the tech enrolls over Ethernet, hands the device to the user, they might not get the connect to Wi-Fi dialog again. So give them an Ethernet dongle with it as well, and they'll be sitting at home with the Ethernet dongle and saying, what do I do with this? Think these things through in your enrollment workflow. They can be trip falls that you don't think about because obviously you have an Ethernet dongle around or the Wi-Fi available. And then we get to the holy grail of automated device enrollment. We get to the device management screen or remote management screen, depending on which version of macOS you're looking at. And then we get to enroll. There are a bunch of options we can use here, which are really great. And most of the things I'm going to show have been added in the last 2 years. And I see in my work with customers at Jamf, a lot of customers aren't using them yet. And I know these things come out at WWDC, everybody talks about them, they get added from the device management service providers in the fall, and you're like, well, that's great, but I'm not on the latest, I have to support the previous 2 versions of OS as well, and I can't use them yet, and I will think about that in 2 years, and then you forget. Because everything's working, right? Why do I need to change it? So there are a few options that we can use. The first one is a bit older, but I do want to mention it. We can enable Auto Advance. It was added in macOS 11 Big Sur. It requires an Ethernet connection if the device is connected through Ethernet before it boots up. The dongle should work. Not all dongles work at the phase, so test which brands work and which don't. It will, as soon as it gets internet, it will get the information from Apple Business Manager, Apple School Manager, and one of the pieces of information in there is you should be using Auto Advance. And if that flag is in there, it will just click through the setup assistant. It's actually fun to watch. It's also frustrating because you have to wait 60 seconds before it kicks in, and if you touch the keyboard or trackpad at any time, it will just stop and say, hey, manual input, you're in control now. When you're testing, it's super frustrating. You have to listen to the voiceover message every time. Do not touch the device. I usually put a piece of paper on the keyboard and trackpad to remind me to not touch the device. But it works great. It actually came from tvOS originally, and it is on macOS. And Apple's documentation says it works on Vision OS, and I have no idea how. Mostly because I don't have a Vision Pro, but you need to connect to Ethernet, so I need to go through the developer kit, and there's no documentation on this. And usually the deployment documentation from Apple is very good, but this is not documented. Hint. We can enforce a minimum OS version before enrollment. This is really cool. Apple added this in macOS Sonoma. And this is what the workflow looks like. I have to click to start. So this is a Sequoia machine. We're at the enrollment screen. We click on enroll, and then we get this dialog and say, hey, you need to be on macOS Tahoe, because that's the minimum that I set in my MDM. And I will start downloading, right? A caching server helps a lot here. I accelerated this. My home network is not that fast. It's fast enough. Once it has downloaded, it will do the verification. It will start with 30 minutes remaining, which is wrong. And then it will say 5 minutes remaining, which is also wrong. Usually takes 7 to 10 minutes, probably depends on the CPU. When it's done, it will reboot on its own. It will go to the black screen with the apple and the progress bar. Takes the normal update time, so somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes if all goes well. And when it's done with that, it reboots and it's on the new OS. And the enrollment hasn't happened yet. It got the information from the MDM server with all the enrollment information, but in there is a flag that says, you need to be on this version of macOS to play on this ride. And then it just does the software update, and it starts the enrollment process over on the new version of the OS. So we click through here, and then we get the enrollment screen again, and you click the enrollment screen. And yeah, there we go. This was added in macOS Sonoma. It honestly didn't really work until later in Sonoma. So Jamf says macOS 14.4, check your device management service documentation when it starts to work. That means the client has to be at least 14.4 to update to a newer version before enrollment. But that's nearly 2 years ago now, so we can really start deploying this and using this and having DFU or other things as a fallback if you should encounter an even older machine. You can set latest minor, latest major, the latest version based on the device, so that some Intel doesn't try to upgrade to Tahoe or next year to macOS 27. Or you can give it a specific minimum version and say, you know, macOS 15.6, you don't have to go to Tahoe, something like that. It works with Auto Advance, which is really amazing. You have to be patient and watch because it takes forever, but it just clicks through everything and it just upgrades and then does the rest of the enrollment with Auto Advance. And set up a caching server, it will speed things up. You can enforce file vault at the enrollment. This is all you can see about it, and even this screen is optional. You can suppress showing the user their recovery key. The recovery key will be escrowed in your device management service. So that's all you might see, and which is a good thing. The user doesn't get a choice to defer or skip the file vault enablement. You force file vault to be turned on. There's also no logout or restart necessary. I still see so many customers using the old workflows where you have to log out and restart or log out once. This is not necessary anymore. We can enforce file vault at login. This was added in macOS 14 as well. The recovery key display is optional. The key will be escrowed in your management service. Enrollment customization is old, but I need to mention it. It basically gives the management server a chance to show a web page over Setup Assistant. We usually use this for login with the identity provider and authorization so that only people who are part of the organization can actually enroll devices. So you've probably seen something like this a lot. This was added in macOS 10.15 Catalina, which is more recent than I thought it was. Before that, we could use LDAP. You can, aside from the authentication, you could add custom branding or an end-user license agreement or something like that. Most people use it for the authorization. I mentioned this because, yeah, I think its days are numbered, and we now get platform SSO, which is very interesting. Last week was Octane, the Okta conference, and our team at Jamf was there, and they showed off platform SSO working with Jamf Pro and a beta version of Okta Verify. And I'm very happy that I get to show this now as well. So what Joel was talking about earlier in theory, I can show in practice. Our team has been working hard during the entire beta phase to make this work. In this workflow, we have Jamf Setup Manager and the Okta Verify beta in the pre-stage. I love the fact that Setup Manager just works with this workflow. So we can use Setup Manager to install the basics. And once it's done, we will fall into the SSO, platform SSO, at enrollment workflow that Joel showed and explained earlier. So while Setup Manager was running, Setup Assistant was sitting at the PSSO workflow screen. This is with the Okta Verify icon. And when we proceed in there, we can enter the username and password for our Okta Verify instance here. And this is a very long username. And we will proceed through the steps. So first of all, this is the username and password that will be used for the account creation. We don't yet get the user icon from Okta. I'm sure we will work on that. But the other user information is grayed out, so the user creation is based on that. You notice we're switching into user space, and True Tone turns back on, so we get the yellow tinge again. We enable Touch ID because we're going to connect our Okta identity with Touch ID. Okta is showing the web interface for multi-factor authentication. In this case, we're using a push message to the Okta app on our iPhone, but that depends on how you've set up your Okta or your identity provider instance. And then it asks us to connect the identity with Touch ID on the device. The last dialog is a bit weird. That's a leftover from the old enrollment workflow. As I said, this is all still beta, but now we're at the desktop. We can open Safari. And in here, we see another thing that's new in Tahoe is managed bookmarks through DDM that we have in Jamf Pro. And when we open the Okta page, we have to connect everything once, but we can use Touch ID because that's already connected, so we don't have to enter the password. And now everything is set up, the SSO extension is set up, and we can just start using, and we only had to enter the password once. Yes. I think our teams and the Okta teams did great work here. It's still in beta. I have no release date, but I really hope it will be soon. Just, next week is JNUC, so we might hear more about that. We installed the profile and the app at enrollment. Joel gave us all the details you could ever need. For this, we authenticate for enrollment. We can block the enrollment from proceeding if they don't have valid authentication, and we create the user from that identity and can connect it with two-factor authentication and to Touch ID if we want to. So with the exception of Platform SSO, which is new in macOS Tahoe, the other features have been around for at least 2 versions of macOS now. And still, I don't see everybody using them. So I really wanted to get the entire picture and to make the enrollment easy and straightforward and human-friendly. If you're not using them yet, please consider using them. So we got past the enrollment. We have all the options set up. The user creates their account, whether they use Platform SSO or Jamf Connect or Xcreds or manually in Setup Assistant. There's a few dialogues that they probably want to choose that we want to leave in there. We don't want to skip all the panes. Like, yeah, let the user choose whether they use light or dark mode. I'm light mode myself. They might get the welcome screen. We like to skip that because it's not customizable, but more about that later. And the user ends up at the desktop, right? And they're done, right? They can start working. They go in, they launch Spotlight, and they want to launch Outlook. Oh, wait, it's not installed yet. They want to launch Xcode, and it's not installed yet. Yeah, that's kind of a bummer. And we haven't installed these yet because they take time. I mean, and on Jamf Pro, we could throw them all in the pre-stage. It actually works. It's just a really bad experience. You have the small spinning wheel in this pre-stage. You have no idea what's going on. And if something goes wrong, you have no idea what went wrong. So that's frustrating. They are big downloads. Xcode is nearly 3 gigabytes, as well as Microsoft Office 365. But the thing that actually takes a lot of time, unless you're on a really slow internet, which zero-touch deployment users at home, they might very well be, the download speed is not the issue. It's the 100,000 plus files they install that actually take a lot of time, even on modern CPUs and modern drives. That takes time. We're talking several minutes here, and once we've added in all the other apps that we want to have, and with Xcode, maybe some SDKs, you need those to start working. GarageBand, all the loops and audio files. We are easily talking 10 gigabytes, possibly multiple tens of gigabytes, or in education, 100. I mean, I haven't even mentioned Adobe Suite or math or engineering apps. They can be absolutely huge. We also want the security pieces in place, ideally before the user starts working. It would be great if those were installed and configured first, ideally before the user even touches the device. We can and we should use self-service portals like Jamf's Self-Service Plus, but most device management services have an equivalent. And we can and we should use those because you will have this list of software that you want to install, and unless you're in education managing labs, there will be some way you can say, oh, these are optional, the user can install them when they need them. And that's totally fair. But you have to whittle it down to a basic installation, say, this is what the people need to work, this is what we need to install to be compliant, and that needs to be on the device very early in the process. And that will take time. In my experience, working with a lot of customers, between 15 and 30 minutes is not unusual. I've seen customers whittle it down to less than 15 minutes, but then it's a really very basic set, and we're just outsourcing the time to later in Self-Service Plus. I've seen education customers with more than an hour going to really insane high numbers. And you have a choice here, right? You can have the users wait these 15 to 20 minutes or 15 to 30 minutes individually, each at their own device, and that is the zero-touch workflow. Or you can have a tech who can manage multiple devices in parallel, like we saw earlier, that scream at him when they do the voiceover thing, and that is the tech-driven approach. And we like to call that single touch as opposed to zero touch as well. Neither of these is right or wrong. Each of them has their own use case. If you're a large enough organization, you will probably need to use both. So you need tools that are also flexible and that can use both of these workflows. But you have to make those plans and you have to make those decisions and organize for that. While these things are installing, whether it's the user sitting in front of the machine or a tech, you want a few things that are happening. You probably want to lock the screen. You probably want some kind of progress bar. I made fun of Apple's progress bars earlier, and they're really hard to build right. But you just want something that's going on, that's happening, so that people know the machine hasn't died and hung up. So some kind of progress bar, some kind of messaging, what's going on, possibly some branding. This is our chance to show branding and show, hey, this is your friendly IT department doing this for you. And the progress bar continues. If there are errors, you probably want to log them somewhere or show them. You don't want to show them to the user because they can't do anything about it. But you want to log them so you can figure out what happened later and maybe prevent that problem. So this is like the MVP of an enrollment progress app. But you don't have to whip out your favorite LLM and write it because there's a ton of them out there already. The granddaddy of them all is DEP Notify, of course, which is really great. It still works, surprisingly, because honestly, no one feels responsible for that anymore. I'm sorry to say, but this will break eventually. So if you're still using DEP Notify, great. Maybe look at some alternatives. Octary Splash Buddy started as Splash Buddy. Now it's called Octary. Commercial solution is still around, works great, is supported. Oh, wait, that was too fast. We have Dan Snelson's Set Up Your Mac script and Trevor Sizok's Baseline, which are both based on Bart Reardon's, where's Bart Reardon? Swift Dialogue, yes. Also great enrollment scripts that can be managed and used to show this. Your device management service will probably have some enrollment progress of their own, like we have at Jamf, in Jamf Self-Service. There's an onboarding, really easy to configure in the web UI. Also works great. And of course, we have Jamf Setup Manager, which I'm kind of proud of. We built Setup Manager in parallel, actually. We didn't know about macOS onboarding when we started working on Setup Manager, but we decided to push through and keep it because they have different target audiences. And Setup Manager is really built to support both the zero-touch and the single-touch workflows, a tech-based workflow where the things are installed before the user even touches the machine. That's our main goal with Setup Manager, but it also works with the zero-touch, because I said earlier, if you're a large enough organization, you probably want both workflows. The branding and all the configuration is done with the configuration profile, so you don't have to edit scripts, which is a source of error. In the latest version, we added a network monitor and an installer log monitor, so we can log installations that weren't initiated by Jamf or Setup Manager and see when they're happening, and they might mess up your enrollment workflow. Having that log has been super valuable. We also send out webhooks at the beginning and the end with status information. You can send them to Slack or Teams, but you can also kick off larger workflows. It works with Jamf Pro and Jamf School. And this is still beta. This is not available yet. We updated the UI for Liquid Glass. And as we were doing that, there were a few other things we changed to make the UI, I think, look a lot nicer. So this is what it looks like. I'm on time. I'm good on time. This is a single-touch workflow. Misha here is playing the tech, and he is logging in with his credentials. This is customized enrollment. It's not PSSO yet. But this is customized enrollment. So the tech has to authenticate to kick off the enrollment. Setup Manager jumps in. And here is where the tech reassigns the device to the final user, which is my account in this case. So in Jamf, once you do customized enrollment, the device is assigned to that user, but we want a different final end user, and Setup Manager does that. Once the tech has jumped over the user entry, we're at the progress screen. We can see certain things, like we have a new network status that can show us that maybe the network relay is already active and our network communication is protected, or that maybe we can watch there that the network goes in and out because things are interfering with the network. We have the information. Once we're through, we go back into Setup Assistant. In this case, we have the location services, and here we have Jamf Connect login kicking in. And Jamf Connect login has picked up the configuration, the reassignment. So at this point, it is me who can log in. So the tech can push the machine over to me and say, here, log in with your credentials. No, I don't need to know your credentials. We don't need to share credentials. We don't need to reset credentials. And then I end up at the desktop with my account and my Mac. That's great. We're at the desktop, right? We're done now. Are we? Yeah, wouldn't it be nice if the desktop looked like this? I said earlier, like, we think about the human, we think about the workflow, but we also need to have the messaging that, hey, this is a managed machine, like different dock, different wallpaper. We can do this with Desktopper and Docutil, and you're probably doing this already, but there are a few other things in the setup experience that we can't really manage that well. We can do the branding, we can do the notifications with configuration profiles, more or less. We can do the background items, but there are certain things that Apple says, hey, this requires user approval. You can kind of sort of pre-approve them in profiles, but the user still has to do the actual clicking and approve that as well because they're privacy sensitive. And we were like, yeah. And we see customers building PDFs and other things to manage this. And we're like, there has to be a better way of doing this. So we're building one. The first thing here is, I mentioned earlier, we have the Apple welcome screen that we can customize. We can switch out the background. We can switch out the message. We can put our localizing in there. So our tool starts with a custom startup screen. This is on Sequoia because I'm having challenges with Liquid Glass porting this, I can tell you. But once we're past the welcome screen, we have this checklist of things. We can give the user a selection of branded wallpapers that they can choose one from, their favorite one. This engages the user. This gives them a bit of ownership. We say we have to switch the browser, but even if the user is smart and says, oh, I will keep Safari, they can continue. And the next step is we open the system preferences to the right page where they have to put the check marks next to the screen recording, and then we're done for this particular workflow. And we are ending up with a branded machine with many of the things that we just need to do ready to go. We call this the setup checklist. We can give messaging with images and movies and the full screen version. Right now we can set the wallpaper, the default browser. We have the screen sharing approval workflow. We can launch other apps and URLs and start up their first setup workflow. There's more. You can think of 1,000 ideas right now that we can add, and we have a list, and I'm very interested in what you're going to do. We are working on this. It's not quite ready. As I said, we have some challenges with liquid glass and Tahoe and making the user interface looking good, but we are working on this, and we want to release this into some beta version pretty soon, and I hope you're going to enjoy this as much as we do. In conclusion, first contact is important, not just with Vulcans, but these are your new coworkers. They should be your friends. You should treat them friendly and give them a great first contact experience as well, while also being professional and saying, hey, this is a managed device. This is not the same as your MacBook at home. But we can make that still an enjoyable and easy process if we keep in mind that humanity and humans are at the center of everything. And with that, I can finally release you to the beer later. Thank you very much.